Sanjana, are we live? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your patience, and thank you everyone for showing up despite the rains. My name is Purva Vaise Patil, and on behalf of the Yashwantrao Chavan Center, I would like to welcome you all to the Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs. The Mumbai Dialogue on World Affairs has been the Chavan Center's effort to create a space for dialogue and discussion on public policy, foreign affairs, and political economy, with the aim of having foreign policy directives emerge from strong centers of influence such as Mumbai. This has been possible because of the efforts of Honorable Member of Parliament, Mrs. Supriya Sure, the architect of this event, and the working president of both the Chavan Center and the Nehru Center. Today marks the 17th session in our series of foreign policy dialogues, and we're very honored and thrilled to host this event in collaboration with the US Consulate General. The title of today's discussion is The Diversity Debate, Implications for the US Elections, Voting and Advocacy. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our panelists this evening. So we have two US election experts, Ms. Alison Wilson and Ms. Dashika Ruffin, and Public Engagement Unit Chief of the US Consulate General Mumbai, Mr. Rob Anderson, who will be moderating today's discussion. A brief bio of our three speakers today. Alison Williams is a strategic planning consultant for nonprofits and corporations. Previously, she was the chief of staff to Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, where she managed the gubernatorial cabinet in staff and policy development and implementation and external communications. She also led the state's first women's commission in nearly 50 years, and through community engagement, provided recommendations to decrease barriers to entry for women in the state's workforce. Ms. Ruffin is a seasoned attorney, advocate, and political operative with over 20 years of experience. She has been at the forefront of some of America's most historic and consequential community-centric, issue-based, and electoral campaigns. Some of her domain includes Obama for America, Hillary for America, Elizabeth Warren for President, Stacey Abrams for Georgia. Currently, she serves as the global head of community engagement and DEI strategies for Google, where she lends her constituency building expertise to build sustainable strategic partnerships and ensure that the organization is a good corporate citizen for communities where Googlers live and work in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. Mr. Rob Anderson heads the Public Engagement Unit at the US Consulate General in Mumbai, overseeing the consulate's cultural and educational outreach across 5 states in Western India. Safe to say he's a Mumbaiker now. Rob is responsible for management of the consulate's American spaces, as well as professional and educational exchange programs, English language outreach, and alumni activities. Rob is a career diplomat with previous postings in Berlin, Armenia, Netherlands, Pakistan, Uruguay, Nigeria. Prior to joining the Foreign Services, Rob served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia from 2001 to 2003. He is from Oregon and holds an MA in International Development from the University of Denver and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Oregon State University. Welcome, panel. We're very excited to hear your thoughts on the upcoming elections and learn from your collective experiences. And I don't think we could have had a better vantage point to learn from such 3 learned members, and I'm sure your experience working in all your respective fields is going to be very useful. We have a very excited audience. We're all very invested in the upcoming US elections, and they're all very eager to ask you a lot of questions and learn from you. So I would encourage everyone to make the most of this opportunity. I would now like to call on Ms. Deepti Nakle, CEO of Chavan Center, Dr. Mrudul Nere, our guidepost for everything that we do, and Datta Bhau to please come and felicitate our guests. Thank you.
Start from Mumbai.
Yeah. Samar, come on stage. So today's format is going to be slightly different. We usually have the speaker give their address and then the chairperson addresses the crowd. But today we have more of a panel, and it's going to be an engaging dialogue between all three panelists here. So first we're going to open the floor to them, and they're going to lead the discussion, and then right at the end we'll open for questions. Yeah? Take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Purva and Chavan Center for doing this. We've been wanting to do something together for quite a while, and so it's finally the stars aligned, and we were able to put this program together. I think the concept of these Mumbai dialogues is it's great because a lot is happening in this country that is being driven from Mumbai, and we don't see that. So you see all the policy happening in Delhi, but a lot of the impetus is taking place here in Mumbai, and it's coming from the corporate sector. It's coming from people here, just sort of the community. It's coming from the education sector, and so it's coming from media. So it's a really, I think it's an important place to be having these kind of dialogues. So we were delighted to partner from the consulate's perspective. So I represent, as was mentioned, I'm a career diplomat, and I work here at the U.S. consulate. I represent the U.S. government. So these two do not. So they're here speaking freely, and I think this just speaks a little bit to American democracy in a way that we have. And maybe coincidentally, I have a Democrat sitting here on my left and a Republican here on my right. And that
worked out very nicely.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was intended that way, but that's how it worked out. But they're here as strategists and U.S. citizens who are deeply engaged in the U.S. political system, and so they're going to shed some light on the happenings and sort of the latest developments there, and then get to some of your questions. But they're speaking on their personal perspective, and they don't represent the U.S. government. So I encourage them to be critical. If they want to criticize us, that's absolutely fine. If you want to criticize us, also fine. Because if we don't have these sort of critical dialogues, then we don't improve, and we don't make our government is not sort of representing our people, right? So that's how this will work. I think it also speaks to American democracy that they're here together, they travel together, you came on the same flight together, they're very civil. They may disagree on certain things, but at least we behave in a civil way around each other, and we talk through some of these issues. So that's the idea today. Now, I think what we want to do, we talked about diversity as sort of underpinning this whole discussion tonight, and I think that's important, and we'll talk about that because it plays a key part in our election process right now in the U.S. But since we have them and they're specialized in a lot of different areas, Allison, for instance, has been in government, in the state government, working for several years, 7, 8 years, as the chief of staff, which was sort of the chief secretary for the chief minister equivalent, governor of Arkansas. So also has a lot of experience in governance. So we want to also kind of tap into that. And I think I talk a little bit about the media and the role there, the media, social media, AI comes in there, like how that's influencing. So I think we want to touch on that a little bit. I want to talk about access to the ballot, which is voter access, getting people out to vote. Some of these issues that you see are there are new laws now in the U.S. that are supposed to make this easier for people to get out and vote, but is that really happening? So I think we want to get into some of those issues. And then, of course, DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which I think is also, it gets left out sometimes. It's very important if you don't have the infrastructure to actually go, if you have disabilities or you can't physically get to a place where you can vote. That's there. So we also wanted to congratulate you all for your election, which just happened. I mean, this is a year of some of the biggest elections around the world, and so this was a really monumental year. And we've just been talking about, getting 65 crore people out to vote in an election in 50-degree heat under the sun, and it's a pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing, display of democracy. So congratulations, I think, to India on that. So with that, I think, and then I think the format, so we'll have a discussion. I'll ask them a few questions, but then as Purva mentioned, we want to get into to hear what's on your mind, so you can take advantage of their knowledge and expertise. So I don't want to dominate the discussion. I'll ask maybe 3-4 questions, and then I'd like to open it up, and let's just hear what's on your mind. So maybe first, we talk about, and which I just learned in the car, actually, that after Labor Day is when Americans, so Labor Day, it's actually Labor Day today in America. So it's this.
We are working on our holiday.
So we're working on our holiday. We made Coyle come and work with us. Also, I have to thank Coyle, quickly, because she put all this together. She's at the team at the consulate, and she wasn't mentioned at the beginning, but Coyle said. So yes, but after Labor Day is when Americans start to really think about the elections and pay attention. Now, they're maybe paying attention a little bit more this year because of some of the dynamics that have happened recently. But now everybody's starting to think about it. So I just want to ask both speakers then to talk a little bit about the current state of play. What are the big, what are the issues now? We're 2 months before Election Day. So I think we're exactly 65 days away, 66 days away. What is going to define now kind of these next 65 days? What issues and the dynamics there? So maybe I'll start with you, Dashika, this time.
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having us. We are so excited to be here. As you can, I'm sure you are aware, our election system has been very quiet the last couple of weeks, right? We had a changeover of a whole new nominee. That has never happened before. And so we are in uncharted territories. So one of the things you might hear in the news is, especially from the Democratic side and the Democratic nominee, is what is Vice President Harris's policies, right? Like, what is she going to run on? She was a VP, for 4 years. And so what is her policy platform? So generally in election, you have running onto your campaign, you have plenty of time to kind of decipher and kind of create your policy platform. She has to have done it in a truncated timeline, right? And so right now she is really doing listening tours and kind of coming up with her own policy planks. What she's going to continue on from the Biden administration, but what policies are she going to make her own? And so one of the things that you hear a lot, what she talks about a lot, is economic opportunity, right? Making sure she wants to strengthen the middle class. And that is making sure that people have access to opportunities, whether this is on the job front, right? We talk about the economy a lot. That is probably going to be the hot topic from both sides, and probably the biggest polling question that Americans care about the most, right? So how are we strengthening the economy? We're still coming out of a pandemic. So what does that look like? 2 is going to be healthcare. So reproductive rights are on the ballot in America. There has been some restrictions on reproductive health that are, first and foremost, they're coming up from, we saw the rollback of Roe versus Wade from the Supreme Court, right? And so that's going to be a major issue that she is tackling as well. And then third, I would say, would mainly just be like livability, and I think and quality of life, and there's many of issues that kind of come into play with that. When we're talking about youth under the age of 25, it's usually student loan debt, right? Climate change, safety, public safety, and how you're feeling safe in your own communities. So those are going to be the myriad of issues. Unfortunately, candidates don't have the luxury of just like focusing on one or two because they're taking care of a whole country. But I would say those are going to be the top issues that are going to permeate from now until Election Day.
Yeah, thanks. Allison, did you want to add?
I would agree with Dashika, particularly on the economy and on reproductive rights. Those are going to be key issues for both candidates to define themselves and define their policies around those. I think immigration is going to continue to be a significant issue in this race. We see a little bit of tacking to the right on the part of candidate Harris, Vice President Harris, and so and I think taking some learnings from things like border walls that are not always the most effective, and making sure that we are both keeping folks from crossing the border legally, but also making it more expeditious and human rights centered for those who are trying to cross into America legally, whether for work or for immigration purposes. So I think we're going to continue to see that, and I think it's going to be used as a cudgel on both sides to drive the debate around that. But beyond that, I think what we're seeing too, Dashika mentioned that Vice President Harris has had so little time to really define her own policy since she announced. Or since she was chosen as the candidate, as a candidate. What are you accept nominee? Thank you. Sorry, jet lag is I think starting to set in a little bit.
They arrived at like 3 a.m. this morning, so
my language is I'm losing a little bit. But I think too, I'm really watching closely how much this election is about tone and vision versus specific policies. Because I think we've seen in the last few weeks, Vice President Harris's popularity in the polling go up without having defined her policies. And I'm curious to see whether that continues through the remainder as more Americans are paying attention, not just political geeks like Dashika and I, but what is the average American citizen? Do they care enough about policies, or are they basing their decision on personality and vision and the way the messaging, the way the campaigns are running it? I think another important dynamic to watch with regard to policy is because Vice President Harris is now positioned in a way to both separate herself from President Biden's agenda and create her own. Similarly, President Trump is working to separate himself from the Project 2025 policy out of the Heritage Foundation, which is a right-leaning policy think tank in Washington, and how they're messaging their own separation from those policies without really defining where they're going to go. And so I think those are a couple of additional dynamics that will be interesting to watch in the election.
Thanks. And one of the things we read about here is the inflation and prices. And is that a big issue? I mean, does that fall under the economy basket then? And then I've been living outside the U.S. now for longer than so I haven't seen, this inflation. But when I hear like my family, talking about prices and stuff, it just that the average American would face in a supermarket. I mean, how is that going to affect?
Well, it does. I'll just say, I think Americans generally, we tend to focus on the price of a gallon of gas, so about half a liter of gasoline, petrol. What does that cost? What does a gallon of milk cost the American family? What does a dozen eggs cost the American family? I think those sort of that barometer of grocery store prices is really important, even as macroeconomists will tell you that inflation is easing in the United States. Most Americans are not yet seeing that in their pocketbook. Yeah.
And so I think that's, Allison just hit it. The conversation around inflation, how are they messaging it, right? So economists are saying we're coming out of this, recession and inflation is down, but if you're not feeling it in your pockets, then how are you listening to the politician who's telling you, well, guess what? This is, we're good on inflation and we're going to continue this policy. If you're not feeling your pockets, then how do you believe that politician to kind of deliver you out of the situation that you're in, right? And so both sides, I think, have struggled with the messaging on the economy. That's why it's such a big issue. So what you'll see a lot of times in the news, because it's very salacious, is the back and forth, right? But everyday Americans, what they're thinking about is how much eggs are, right? Bread, gas. And so the way that the media kind of portrays things, I know we'll talk a little bit more about the media, but the issue that gets the tabloids and, you know, the front page of the news may not be the thing that Americans care about every single day.
And I think it's a good segue into the media, but I think before we go there, I wanted to just touch on this swing state idea. And I don't know, is everybody here familiar with the swing states and how that works? So there's a handful of states where this election is now campaigning. And so I think just maybe to talk a little bit about that, like why these 6, 7 states? What is the difference? See, I come from Oregon. I never even know if an election is happening because we, you know, it's
You're
just
not a swing state.
No, we're not a swing. I mean, it's always blue. It's always so. Then you know, we never get a candidate. We never see. And then you're in, you know, like in Georgia, you would see candidates coming through every week. So maybe talk a little bit about that and how that.
So in our election process, well, most election process, it's, you know, when you vote, whoever gets the most amount of votes wins, right? In America, it's not quite that. We have something called the Electoral College, right? And so it's based off electors. So each state gets a certain amount of elector based on the population. So some of the bigger states, like California, has the most. Some of the smaller states, like Oregon, will not have that many
Arkansas
electoral
has
votes.
6. How many does California have? Do you know?
55.
So California has 55. My home state of Arkansas has 6.
Exactly. And so basically the way that U.S. Political system is broken down, the 2 major parties, even though we have other parties, but third party nominees haven't kind of cracked the code yet. So based on the 2 parties, the United States is broken down. So each political party gets a certain amount, they have a floor. And so what gets them over is about 7 to 8 swing states, which we call battleground states, right? And so those are the states that are really up for grabs. So while each candidate might campaign in every single state, they really, really, really focus on the battleground state because that's where they make, you know, the biggest splash. And so they know that, you know, like a California, typically going to be blue, right? And Arkansas, typically going to be red. But a Georgia, who used to be red and now is purple.
Well, hold on. What red is Republicans. And
right,
blue
I'm sorry,
is Democrats.
red, yes. And so a Georgia, which used to be Republican red, is more, I say blue, but it's really purple. Right? And so those, you know, the candidates will come through a Michigan, a Nevada, a Georgia to make sure that they capitalize on that state being in play.
And does anyone know, if you know about the Electoral College, does anyone know how many times in the last 25 years the U.S. presidential race has actually reflected the popular vote? Does anyone know the answer to that?
Ooh.
That's exactly right. That's right.
There you go.
So lots of folks who were elected and didn't make it because the way the Electoral College is established and the way it works.
And it's all about math, right? So there's 270 electors that are up for grabs. So that's why, like on election day, and you're watching CNN or MSNBC or whatever, and you see a big board and they're counting down because they're trying to get to that magic number of 270.
So it's 270 to win, right?
270 to
you're
win,
basically,
correct.
Yeah, okay. And so there are all these paths. So if you're watching, CNN now, you'll start to see like, oh, they're, you know, like if Pennsylvania goes blue, then this is the pathway, and it's, you know, but if it goes red, then they also need Nevada, and they need this and that. So that's always a kind of fascinating thing for political science students, and of course, like political, what'd you say?
Geeks. Yeah, you can call
like ourselves, yeah. So that's always fun to watch. But and so maybe now on media. So how does that affect then especially in the swing states? Because I was thinking like if you're in Georgia, you're not watching like a national news interview necessarily, like something on CNN maybe, or I mean maybe you are, or New York Times reading an article. You'd be more focused on like your local news happening in your community. Is that the case? And will you see candidates now start to play more in those local markets than national media?
Certainly well, I think if I understand your question correctly, I think we'll start to see a lot more political campaign ads, right? And so even if you're not in a battleground state, campaigns are buying up time on the airwaves to present themselves to the American public. And I think that what has tended to happen is that even especially in a state like Arkansas, we are only 3 million people. We're in the center of the country, and there's a great deal of nationalization of our politics. So what we see happening in the national news tends to drive conversations in our communities, even when they're not really an issue in our community. Now, we can say things like immigration does affect us all, even before we saw certain governors busing and flying immigrants to other parts of the country, because we, especially in Arkansas, we're very agriculture heavy economy, and so we would see a lot of migrant workers coming in seasonally to help with harvests and crops and that sort of thing. So I think there is a nationalization of the way of how media talks about the election, and in my opinion, not enough talk at the local level about what actually matters to the people on a day-to-day basis. What does it take to get gasoline and a price of eggs to a more reasonable amount?
And in the governor's office, did you see more, were you targeting more like local media?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Although I will say, so for 75 days, I ran a presidential campaign, which is not a lot and not nearly like what Dashikul has done. But in the governor's office, Governor Hutchinson was very dedicated to ensuring local media always got access. But he was well known for a lot of other things. He had worked in federal government as well. And so he would get invited to national TV shows, particularly the Sunday shows, which are big political magazine shows on the weekends. He would get invited to comment on the national news as well.
And I think, and this might be a difference between being in a battleground state and a non-battleground state, but definitely in swing states, you are advocating and advertising on local avenues, right? Because not everyone watches the national news. And so you see a lot of op-eds in the newspapers. Radio is still a thing. It's the cheapest way of advertising and campaigning. So you'll see a lot of like radio ads. Digital ads are very important. You can geo-target for digital ads, right? So if you're in a swing state, and not even a swing state, in probably the next month and a half, starting in October, in America, you're not going to be able to log on to Facebook or Twitter without seeing a political ad. It just won't happen, right? You won't be able to turn on a TV and watch your, favorite show without seeing a political ad, right? And so that's just where we are with the media. The media plays a big part in campaigning. It plays a big part in disseminating information, but it also can play a big part in spreading of disinformation, right? And so we have to be really responsible when it comes to media and advocacy and campaigning. And
yeah, can you talk a little bit about that more, about the disinformation, misinformation? Like, what are you seeing, or what does that look like?
So AI, I don't like to say that AI is a bad word. I know a lot of people are like, as soon as they hear AI, it's just like, oh my gosh, here comes the negative, right? But with any new technology, we know that there are some dangers. And so one of the biggest dangers from AI is the spread of misinformation, disinformation, right? And so we are seeing a lot of deepfakes, right? Where it's like videos are purportedly coming from a candidate saying one thing, right? We're seeing a lot of things where it might be a deepfake of President Biden saying, guess what? Make sure you go out and vote on November the 6th. Well, our election's November 5th, right? And so that is like trying to trick people out of utilizing their voice, right, and exercising democracy. We're also seeing where candidates are using their opposition's voice or likeness to purport a particular issue, right? And so those are the things that because AI is so new, it is hard to regulate, right? It's also ever evolving. And so the experts, even Google, don't have like a complete wrap around it, because the ramifications and the regulations that we come up with by the time we come up with them, AI is like 5 years ahead, right? And so it's just trying to keep up with the emerging technology. But we're also seeing it being used for good things, right? So in the US, we don't keep a really great record of our voter rolls, right? So a lot of times we'll have people who have passed away 10 years ago and they're still on the voter rolls. So AI plays a really big part in generating mechanisms in order to kind of clean the voter rolls and make sure that the right people are on the ballot so that they can they can exercise their vote.
And so on that note, I guess exercising the right to vote and on this issue of ballot access, so I think both campaigns are really pushing to get voters out. I mean, that's the idea, just, to get to motivate, the general public to get out and vote, but also certain demographics and youth, and how do you mobilize people and make them go and vote on election day. And then there are kind of this ballot access issues. So maybe you could touch on that, just talk a little bit about the state of play there and what you see. Are more people, should we expect more people coming out this time to vote, or same turnout?
I think yes. I think we are, especially with the disruption in the campaign cycle that we've seen with the new candidate on the Democratic side. I think it's generated a lot of energy in the electorate. I also think that we don't always make it the easiest to register to vote, and that varies by state to state. State laws in America determine voter registration. Sometimes you can simply, when you go to get your driver's license, it's called motor voter, you're automatically registered to vote. Others, you have to jump through several other hoops to do that. And then there's also differences in how early voting or lack of early voting or mail-in voting, those rules also differ from state to state. And so navigating that landscape and knowing not only how to register to vote, but then when you can vote and where you can vote, I do think that actually AI also presents another good opportunity for how to spread that information about getting the vote out.
And so for a country that has the longest democracy, we don't do the greatest job at making sure that everyone has free access to the ballot. So in addition to making it harder or difficult or obstacles to registering to vote, once people are registered, sometimes there's barriers in order to actually exercise their vote. And so we've seen, and there's historical contexts about it, right? So 1965, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, right? And one of the major parts of the Civil Rights Law was Section 5, which created a pre-clearance for states who were known to historically marginalize, specifically Black and brown people, from voting. There was pre-clearance, so anytime they wanted to update their elections laws, they had to get federal government approval to do so. However, in 2013, that was gutted. And so what we have seen since the gutting of the Voting Rights Acts is this emerge of all these new voting rights laws, right? That, in my opinion, go to suppress the vote. So we've seen these voter IDs, right? So when people talk about voter IDs, you're like, wait, of course, you should have an ID to vote. That's just common sense, right? It's a little more complicated than that, right? So when we're talking about voter IDs and ID laws, a lot of people don't have an ID, right? It's not always the easiest. There's fees for it. There's a transportation issue about it. But then also college students, right? So in many states, a state ID will allow them to register to vote and to vote. However, some private schools, especially historically Black colleges, that ID is not valid, right? Doesn't really make sense, right? And so you have to understand where those targeted laws, one, are placed, and then why, right? We're seeing the emergence of banning of ballot boxes, right? So in 2020, we know it was very hard for people to vote during the pandemic. And so this was one of the times that a lot of states allowed ballot boxes. Well, right now, they're getting rid of the ballot boxes, right? What is the reason? So we're asking these questions of why are things being harder instead of we're making it easier. I know we saw with you all in your 2024 election, you guys have rules where there has to be a polling precinct, within a mile and a half of where everyone votes, right? Or everyone lives. That's not the case in the U.S. A lot of polling precincts are being closed where you have to travel, 10 miles in order to go to a polling precinct, right? So that's making it very difficult for someone who doesn't have transportation to be able to go vote. And so all of those laws and all of those rules taken together are making it harder for people who don't have means, right? In Georgia, it is very common on election day to spend at least 4 hours voting. Right, I see some faces, right? And so, and when I say very likely, 4 hours is, I live in an area that's very populated, so that's a short time to me. 8 hours is usually the norm, right? And then they're creating laws where, a person like me, if you're standing in line for 8 hours, I can't come in and provide you water to stay in line. So you're staying in the line for 8 hours in a hot summer day in Georgia. It's always hot, right? And can't be provided water. And so those kind of laws all taken together, to us really doesn't make sense, but they have a devastating impact on people and voter turnout. And so making sure that we're making it easier to vote instead of harder is the way that we strengthen our democracy.
And are either of the candidates talking about this? Like, is that sort of on the, something that they would try to put in place if they come into government?
So because of our election systems are really generated by state law, not necessarily the nuances. So what you have heard Vice President Harris talk about is, she's going to sign the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would establish that rule that I was talking about, the pre-clearance. So from a federal perspective of it, they are talking about it, but those nuance, ballot boxes, that's like the local elections, which are even more important than the state elections.
And we've heard some candidates discourage things like early voting and ballot, mail-in ballot voting. And so I grew up in a military family. It was very important that my family have access to mail-in voting because we were often overseas, and even when we were in the United States, we're not in the place where my parents held their driver's license, which essentially is the voter ID. And so we have seen some candidates who've said, don't vote early, or don't vote, this is corrupt, this is these are fake ballots. And so that also depresses voter engagement because our votes always happen on a Tuesday. Our elections always happen on a Tuesday. I don't know about y'all. I'm usually working on a Tuesday, so not the most convenient time. And so these things like early voting and mail-in ballots are the things that give access to folks in a way that they aren't otherwise given access.
And I come from Oregon, and I think ever since I've been voting, it's only mail-in ballots. So we've only mailed. I've never gone to a poll and voted in my life. It's always been mail-in. So that's very, like you were saying, I think that it's so specific per state and local.
So I want to make one quick additional distinction because we also, do y'all have primary elections here? Does that exist here?
Yeah, like where the Democrats try to find their candidate and the Republicans theirs.
Okay, so no, selected by the party. Okay, so in the United States, we have what are called primary elections, and this is where voters get to decide who is going to represent the Democrat and Republican Party. And it's very different from the nomination process in the convention, but equally important. And these also have very different laws state by state. And so Iowa has its first, it's technically called a caucus, but they have the first primary election of the election cycle, and that happened in January of this year. The last states to have their primary were just last week, I think. And so you see this very long span of time where, again, it's important to know what those voter laws are, what the time frame is, particularly from a presidential election standpoint, because if you want to gain the kind of traction that the media is going to talk about, that people are going to pay attention and recognize, you have to know what those voting laws are in each state so that you can get to the voters at the right time with the right message so that they can go and vote, hopefully in your favor.
Okay, let's open it up for questions. And here you heard some things, but there are some other things we could get into a little more on DEIA. But yeah. Oh wait, sorry. Yeah, you're taking mine.
We'll share.
I have a question in the context of the spate of shooting incidents that you have in US. How do you explain the stranglehold of National Rifle Association in the policy making of the governments in the gun control, or rather the lack of gun control?
So in the United States, the Republican Party is generally recognized as more affiliated with the National Riflemen's Association, the NRA, and they are the largest gun owners and association in the United States. Another large one is the National Sports Shooting Foundation. They're another association that focuses on the rights of Americans to bear and use arms. Of course, I hope it's no surprise, the right to bear arms is a sacred amendment to our Constitution. It is something that a lot of Americans feel very strongly about. I think you've hit on exactly a very critical question about how we balance that right to bear arms with the proliferation of weapons that are used for violence, particularly against civilians. I can't stand here and suggest that I know what NRA's position or why their policies that they have, except that they depend very foundationally on that Second Amendment. And whether anything gets done at the federal level to address things like school shootings, I think, for example, will depend on the youth vote that we've been talking about. So we see things like particularly around school shootings where the young people will get together and actually go and vote or create a caucus around that to then talk to the legislators about it. I hope what you've seen today so far between Dashika and I is that we fundamentally agree on a lot of things. I wish that was the same. Actually, I believe it's the same in our Congress and our legislature. I think politics tends to get in the way, political expediency tends to get in the way of common sense a good part of the time. And so I hope we'll have a better answer. I will have a better answer for you the next time we get a chance to talk.
One thing to add, the reason why those kind of groups are so impactful is because there is a thing of dark money in politics, right? And so the NRA is one of the largest lobbying groups in America, right? They provide a lot of money to candidates. And so when you have a candidate or candidates or a party that is backed by a lobbying group that gives you money, and this happens on both sides, so you're just speaking to one issue where the lobbying group is on the Republican side, it tends to navigate and persuade you to vote and advocate a certain way. And so that's why there's a really big push at getting dark money out of politics, right? That allows like everyday people, because campaigning is very expensive. And so if you don't have the money to back you, if you don't have the money to communicate your message, generally you're not going to win, right? So it's almost a catch-22. You need the money in politics, but then once you get that money, what does that mean after you're elected?
And I want to say something on behalf of my country, too. I hope that it doesn't discourage you from visiting the United States, because what I can say is that certainly, particularly during and on the heels of COVID recovery, we had seen significant increases in crime and violent crime in the United States in many cities around the country. That trend is going downward now. I think the focus on mental health that our Surgeon General has placed on loneliness, on connectedness within communities are going to really support that continued downward trend. But I do hope that you'll come visit.
Fingers crossed.
Hi, I have a question regarding Gaza. I want to know what kind of role will that play, especially from the Democratic Party side, considering that a lot of the supporters were social democrats. The AOCs of the world have been taking a stance against the party itself.
So it's a very huge, so the funny thing is when we talked about the the issues that are impacting the election, that's completely different than the issues that are impacting the individual party, right? And so the war, the Israel-Gaza conflict is one of the issues that, it's a dividing issue within our party. I know you all saw the protests that happened on college campuses, earlier this year up until May, right? In states like Michigan, which is a swing battleground state, they had over, I think, don't quote me on the number, but I think it was like 66,000 uncommitted voters that refused to pledge their support for President Biden, but now VP Harris, until a ceasefire is reached, right? And so there's a lot of there's a lot of things that are going into that. She has called for a ceasefire. However, there are still weapons that are being supplied by the U.S. government, right? So it's like kind of a catch-22. This is probably one of the biggest issues that is impacting the Democratic Party that continues. So I think it was last night, I'm foggy on time right now, but last night Israel compromise was reached, right? So now it's on the Palestinian government to accept that deal. We don't know if it's going to happen. This is probably like maybe the fourth or fifth iteration of a compromise that has not been passed. So I surmise this is still going to be an issue all the way up to November. And then you're also going to see turnout being impacted by this issue as well.
Yet on the Republican side, it's much more cohesive. We saw our Republican Speaker of the U.S. House, our lower house of Parliament, Netanyahu, was invited to come and address Congress, which is a very special and high honor. Very few foreign leaders are asked to do that. So we see a much more cohesive approach on the Republican side. But I expect if President Trump is elected, it will continue to be an important issue.
Yeah. So we hear about America first, as well as we hear about US foreign policy. So my daughter's studying in US, so she was here and she's just left back. So she was saying, for me, Democrats are good. She's staying there. And she said, Dad, for you, probably Republicans are better. So I'm a bit confused about that.
Well, I think I missed a little bit because I got distracted, but so.
My daughter's studying in US.
Yeah.
So she said for her, Democrats are good.
Democrats are good.
Yeah, and she said that for you, you're in India, Republicans are good for you.
Oh, and so you don't understand what she means when she says that.
Yeah, and maybe what she was trying to say is from a foreign policy perspective. From an India point of view, probably Republicans are better. But for Indians staying in US, probably Democrats are better.
Well, I can't say, I think your daughter on the surface is probably right. So I'll just speak to the Republican side and then defer to Dashika on the Democrat side. I think there's at least a perception in foreign policy that Republicans have been more inclined to strengthen the bilateral relationship with India. I don't know enough about it to say that that's true or not true, but I think there's a perception on both sides that that's the case. That is something Republicans are actually very proud of. They're very proud of their relationship with India, the importance of that bilateral relationship, the importance of the bilateral trade, and the importance of the knowledge sharing that goes back and forth between the two countries. So, look, if you want to move to Arkansas, we'll take your vote, absolutely. But I'll defer to Dashika on whether Democrats are good for young people.
Well, Democrats are great for young people. No, I'm just saying, let me stop being biased. I think it depends on the issues that your daughter cares about, right? And so some of the things that the Democrats are talking about and a lot of young people are excited about is, student loan debt, getting their student loans forgiven, and there's a tangible outcome from that, right? So it's just something they saw immediately, right? When you're talking about climate control and climate change and those kind of policy, clean air, clean energy, environmental justice, things like that. Now, I wouldn't go as far as we're not great on foreign relations. I definitely think, the difference between, I will actually say, the two original candidates, so President Trump and President Biden, I definitely think President Trump did a better job of fostering personal relationships, right? So we talked about the relationship that President Modi and President Trump had, the personal visits and things like that. I definitely think that if we're going to continue having allies, which will continue under both administrations, I definitely think that there is something to a personal relationship, right, with an ally, and not. And I'm not saying either party does this, but like it's almost a phenomenon of like meet a friend before you need a friend, right? And so if you're continuously having and enjoying a friendly relationship, then when you're called upon, it'll be kind of easier. And so I think, just having that, there's already like such integral part that India and U.S. Relations play. And so making sure that both sides understand that and it's communicated and it's celebrated.
I would just add from the current administration too. I mean, you've heard President Biden talks about India as the most consequential partnership in the world. So it's not. I think no matter who comes into power, that won't change. It's just too important right now. U.S. India is just too important, and so I think that's going to continue. The agreement, one of the most recent sort of joint statements that came out of a meeting of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi was something like 55 pages long, or so. It's like it was a complete. There's been nothing like that with so many areas of partnership and collaboration. And once that starts to get institutionalized, like we're working now a bit already on things like ISET, the critical and emerging technologies kind of agreement that looks at advanced technology partnerships. And once you start building in some of these and institutionalizing some of these collaborative relationships, then it's very hard to undo. Anyway, it'll just continue the momentum, and I think the next, president, whoever that is, would continue that.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to find out about after the elections, like depending on who wins, what would be the thing on the immigration laws? I mean, like we already find, EB5, that they think that the Indians and the Chinese are big time, want to get the green card and stuff like that. But then at the same time, they're making it stricter for the people who already have jobs there. So how do you think that the elections would implicate that for the people?
It's a good question, and you talked about it. I don't know if that was here or in our previous engagement, but about like kind of in Arkansas when you're talking about migrant labor. That's across the U.S. We need this kind of labor, and Indians are often working they go and study in the U.S. Then they're also getting H-1B visas, or they're working after their studies for in a kind of in Silicon Valley and a lot of these tech firms. So I think they're filling a labor gap. But then I guess how does that change maybe or not?
I actually don't think it changes. Like we depend on that relationship and labor and shared learning, right? And so one of the things that people don't realize, especially in the federal government, there's civil services, right? And so there are professional, or what is the term called? Not the political appointees, but the
civil service.
Yeah, but there's a term for it. But so those are individuals who stay regardless of the political party, right? And those are the people who are responsible for the everyday services that we depend on. So the immigration, there might be larger policies that come from each administration, but the processes stay the same. And so career folks, that stay throughout the administration, so that there's not disruption in services.
I think also, too, it's important in the American system that regardless of what a president says he or she wants to accomplish, most of that is going to have to come, particularly in the realm of immigration, would have to come from our Congress in order to make changes. And we have seen time and time again the difficulty of coming to bipartisan immigration reform in the United States. I've seen it personally over the last 20 years, and most recently, a bipartisan bill that was scuttled earlier this year. So I think in terms of, there's probably tweaking around the edges of some of that policy in terms of what is in law already, but wide swaths of change, I think, are probably out of reach for some time still.
Do you see corporate policy changes when one government goes and new one comes in within US?
If we see what,
So it's like any corporate policies. If there is 1,000 companies in US, government has formed policies, main policies, and when the government is there, that government goes out and a new government comes in, different party. So any changes happens?
Yeah, like I guess the big policy.
A big policy.
If you would, you know, like if you had, for instance, if Trump were elected,
Yeah.
what are the big changes you would see policy-wise?
Well, I think the other thing it's important to recognize is that we will have legislative elections as well. So we'll have congressional elections, and a third of our upper house will be elected. And so there's a lot of debate, just as there is on how close the presidential race is, on some of these Senate races that are really important as well. And so I think similar to the immigration question, I wouldn't see, unless there's a supermajority of either party in the legislature as well, these policies they cannot be, by virtue of the way the US government is separated into three branches, it defies change. So I would not see a lot of, I mean, I think, so in terms of like where is the biggest change going to be, I think the rhetoric will be around things like immigration, reproductive rights, but whether those things are actually changed will depend on a lot more than executive fiat.
Okay. So my question is regarding the healthcare policy of US. Given, like, I have some data for you. So recently there were 27 million Americans that are uninsured, and the healthcare for the families have exceeded $22,000 annually. Both of you talked about the inflations right from the gasoline to the healthcare insurance, and which have been a constant thing into media since the last elections also. Also, 140 rural hospitals have been shut down since 2010. So are the recent candidates giving out their healthcare proposals genuinely like address this profound disparities, or like will they plan something sustainable remedies, or they are just mere political gestures?
That's a really good question. Yes, I can tell, yes. So I do think the conversation around healthcare sometimes does come off as like a political talking point, right? We know it's an issue. We know how it impacts Americans every single day. However, larger scale policies are outside of, the biggest reform that we've had to our healthcare system was the Affordable Health Care Act, right? However, there's still a lot more that needs to happen. The federal government usually mandates that to the states, right? And so, for instance, I'll give you Georgia. Georgia, we have roughly 65,000 individuals who are stuck in between the insurance and Medicaid gap that are uninsured, right? In rural Georgia, so our southern Georgia, we've had 12 rural hospitals that closed, right? Making it harder for people to even access health care. And so it almost becomes like a political bargaining tool, right? Where the federal government has left it up to states to expand Medicaid and given like vouchers for it. It's up to those particular state governors to accept it or not, right? And the reason why they accept or deny, it's a variety of reasons, right? But the people who are stuck in the healthcare gap don't care about those reasons. They just want their health care, right? So I definitely think the conversation, while nationally it's really centered on general health care and reproductive rights, I think when you start getting to the local side, like the gubernatorial races, but also like the Senate races, even though they don't really mandate that. But those are the times where the healthcare conversation comes up in a more targeted way. And so I think that's just kind of where we are right now. I don't see there's going to be like larger scale. We're probably not going to see another affordable healthcare policy that comes from the federal government.
We're not getting universal health care?
We are not getting universal health care. However, there are candidates that are running on that. They tend not to get the largest share of the vote, right? So you've seen a Bernie Sanders or, people like that. It is a conversation that is a continued conversation in America. But yeah, that is where we are as a country.
And I think to the point earlier too, the healthcare lobby in the United States is a really big, they pour a lot of money into the system as well. So whether they're hospitals or they're insurers, if you are connected to the healthcare industry in some way, you have a vested interest in preserving the status quo, and you have a vested interest in convincing politicians to maintain status quo as well. All that said, Affordable Care Act was a huge win for particularly poor states like Arkansas, where we had 30% of our population on Medicaid already. And so that expansion to get to those that were between Medicaid and didn't have enough to pay for private insurance, most of those are now covered, and we see healthcare disparities and healthcare in general improving.
Hello. I have question related to diversity. What are the key or major arguments for and against diversity as a factor in political advocacy? But before that, what is diversity for USA? What is diversity? Is it that can lead arguments? Is it racial diversity, or is it regional diversity, or caste diversity?
I want to defer to Dishika first on that one.
It's all of the above, right? So when we're talking about DEI, it is not, so I know in India there's not really a race tension here, right? So it might seem like a foreign concept. It is kind of the American way, where a large set of the population has been left out of a lot of opportunities, right? And so from the 60s and 70s, you saw various laws, like I mentioned the Civil Rights Act, right? There's also like affirmative action programs to make sure that you're leveling the playing field. However, we've seen the emergence of a lot of those laws be restricted, right? And so where we were moving forward, kind of feels like we're moving backwards a little bit, right? And so you've seen this emergence of DEI, which is all about making sure that people who are qualified that have been marginalized get then left out of the conversation, get brought back to the table, right? However, it has become very, very, very politicized, right? And polarizing. It has become like a four-letter word, right? That, it almost feels like it's like a bad thing, right? And so when we talk about DEI, like in the political sense, right, it's almost like, well, if you're a DEI candidate, you're hearing that a lot. This person didn't deserve to be here. However, I say DEI actually means definitely earned it, right? Because the people who are usually marginalized from a particular opportunity almost have to work twice as hard in order to get there, right? And so if you're just, all DEI does is give you an opportunity to kind of be seen, you still have to do the work and have the qualifications to kind of get in or whatever. And so when we're talking about DEI, it is gender, it is racial, it's ethnicity, it's sexual orientations, it's social economic status, right? That goes into play. And so when we're talking about, especially on the advocacy and campaigning side, if we're talking about strengthening democracy, and we know democracy works best when there's different perspectives and everyone has an opportunity to participate, then we have to make policies that allow that. And that's where the DEI comes into place.
Can I get opinions of them also, as this is a diversity question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I would be interested to hear a little. I think actually some of what she was saying, from what I know about India too, about kind of reservations, and I think some of these topics are under discussion here as well. And I think it's something that we're sort of always grappling with affirmative action and these policies. But then on equity, I think it's interesting that the consulate, we're working a lot on women's economic empowerment and sort of that, getting more women into politics, into the workforce, and however we can support that. And I think in politics, it's just, if you look at India, you look at the US, look anywhere around the world, that equity piece, you're just not seeing numbers. So I think that is also important and in DEIA, and I would just be interested to hear from, because you both have worked on that, and especially I think, Allison, you've really worked in that issue of women in politics, so maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier about this, and So it was mentioned earlier that I ran the first women's commission in the state of Arkansas in 50 years. And some of the findings that we had were around how to get more women into the workforce. We didn't focus so much on getting them into the political arena, but what would get you into the workforce also would benefit political action as well. And we see things in the United States that are foundational, things like financial resources that where women leave the workforce or they historically have been paid less than their counterparts for the same job. So that sort of financial inequity really creates a barrier for women to either be independent or to grow their families in the way that they would like or to work how they would like. And a lot of that also depends on the accessibility of quality and affordable childcare. So because women in America are generally the ones who provide the care to their children and to elders as well, then they're taken out of the workforce or have to work different hours in order to accommodate that. And so earlier, I was mentioning there was a first time in federal election law just a couple of years ago allowed where women could charge female candidates could charge childcare as a campaign expense. And so things like that contribute to equity in many fields. And in the governance space, when you're actually in office, making sure that your office represents the constituency that you're representing. So for us, we were a statewide office. It was important to me that our office represent from a number of different socioeconomic and demographic standards that our office represented Arkansas as a whole.
One last question. How does diversity with the electorate influence voting patterns in the US elections?
How does diversity within the electorate influence voting? Is that right? Voting patterns?
I think so one of the things we're seeing when it comes to our elections and the conversation around DEI is one, who is being targeted for voting, right? So it influences voting behaviors. If you are making sure, if you are focusing on some of the principles of DEI, then you're outreaching to different bases, right? You're also making sure that your campaign or your organization reflects the individuals that you are reaching out to, right? So if it's a campaign, then you're making sure that if I'm reaching out to, let's say, Latino American people, you make sure that your campaign represents that as well. And so it's all about building the principles of DEI into your campaign, into your advocacy group, into your organization, right? If you want to recruit more diverse work pool, then you have to go outside of the normal realms of hiring, right? Making sure that the principles that you're enacting are intentional, purposeful, and they intersect as well.
And not siloed off into some office within the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we had one here and then.
Okay. First, I'd like to congratulate the Democrat and the Republican sitting together and having a wonderful dialogue and a conversation. It really is a matter that a lot of people have to learn about too. And also congratulations that, being the world's largest, the longest democracy, is the first time that you really have a woman candidate seriously coming into power. And we hope, at least, let us see what the outcome of that election is. So I think, we in India, of course, have women leaders. And our side of the world has promoted a lot of women leaders. But my question to you is that, over the years of these 230 years, 40, 50 years of democracy, and the question could be to either of you, America has always, to my mind, as a child, as we grew up, been seen as a peacemaker. In the larger aspect, under the umbrella, on the world umbrella, it always emerged even in the Second World War, the Americans are coming and the world is going to be saved, etc. But today, when I'm looking, I'm looking very critically, and this is not personal, it's just something that, one looks at, is that, there is so much aggression, there is so much arms and ammunition, there's so much weaponization that is coming from America. So, how would, either the Republican or the Democrat be able to deal with that? I would like to have some clear-cut answer, if I may. Thank you.
I would love a clear-cut answer, too. Yeah, I don't mean to dismiss the question, but these are complex and historical, these are generally regarded and governed by treaties, and so, and I think we see a little bit in Congress, particularly with the Israel and Gaza conflict now, we see some difference of opinion, but in general, the U.S. defense budget is very healthy, and I expect that it will continue to be that way. Yeah, I think it is. The Republicans, especially in general, again, I'm broad brushing. Not every Republican believes this, but in general, the Republican Party is much more hawkish on defense policy, and so I absolutely, I don't expect to see significant expansion of arms in going into countries. I do expect that America will continue to maintain its commitment to its allies around the world.
And I think it's real quick. I definitely think, and this is regardless of what party wins, there's a general love of country and there's a general love of our position in the world as that peacemaker that you were talking about. So I think both sides wants to maintain that. The avenue of getting there might seem murky, but I think eventually we will get back to that place.
Hi, this is Sudhakar Malpe. Let me first congratulate YB Chavan Foundation for bringing the excellent debating people of US and US Consul General himself, he is here. Thank you very much. Let us give a big hand to YB Chavan's dynamic CEO. I have 100 questions divided into two of you, 50-50, but time doesn't permit for that. But I'll bring down to three simple questions. Is American are ready to elect and empower women to be a president? Because we have seen that Hillary Clinton was almost won the election, but she finally had to sit back. And today, Kamala Harrison also is an Indian, and Trump's running mate's wife is an Indian, Usha. So there is a challenge, which we see in Americans electing that. That is number one. Number two is that battleground states, are they changing in their character? Like, India, it happened in 2024. UP was supposed to be, giving Uttar Pradesh. It is also, hilariously, it is known as Ulta Pradesh. Actually, it became reverse. It did not return, 80 candidates to the ruling party. It gave only this thing. Is there a character change is being recognized in that? Number three is that, see, India and Estonia, the small state of Russia, is the only one, two of them are using EVM, electronically voting machines, which is manipulable. Even the manufacturing of EVM countries, they don't use EVM. We are the only people, and Estonia. How do you value that? Is the elections are really happening, or is it manipulated? Because, Madam said that, we are not getting right to vote. Thank you.
So I'm gonna take the voting machines question first because they're the bane of my existence sometimes. In states like Georgia, where I'm from, we have voting machines that if they were a person, they would be old enough to vote, meaning 18 years old or more. I'm sure you've heard all the back and forth about Dominion voting machines and the lawsuits. It is very interesting and sometimes I think sad how in some states the voting machines, so for instance, you all have the voting machines and then you have a printout, like a paper ballot to kind of verify it. Yeah, it's a simple concept. Sometimes we just can't get it right. So many states do it right. However, we have states where it's just, you know, if you print out a paper ballot, then one thing. Your question number one is the U.S. ready for a woman president? Absolutely. I'm just going to say that, yes, absolutely. I will take liberty because I actually work for Hillary Clinton. The difference of what we're seeing now versus what we've seen in the past is one, a benefit to Vice President Harris. So you have Hillary Clinton, who had, before she ran for president, had over 30 years of public service, right? That's a long time for people to define who she is, right? Regardless if that's true or not. And so by the time she ran for president, there was already this idea of, you know, who she is, what she's gonna stand for. And regardless of how she wants to define herself, that was already there. I think the difference between Vice President Harris is, even though she has been the vice president, she's largely unknown to a lot of people, and this gives her an opportunity to kind of define who she is, both a part of the Biden administration and separate from that as well. And then I think I'm missing.
Is the character of battleground states going to change dramatically?
No, not at all. Until we get rid of the Electoral College, what I'm in favor of doing, and I think we should go with the popular vote, whereas like whoever gets the most amount of votes should win. Until we get rid of that system, we're never going to get rid of battleground states. Now, who becomes a battleground state changes. So like we talked about Georgia. Georgia just emerged, even though I know it was a battleground state in my head for probably 20 years, it emerged within the last like 6 years as a battleground state. Your Floridas are always going to be a battleground state, North Carolina. So who is considered a battleground state changes, but the concept of battleground changes, states are not going to change.
I also want to highlight that even though there has been a significant amount of misinformation and disinformation out there about the security of American elections, whether it's in electric voting machines or not, I mean, we had in the latter part of the 20th century, the first part of the 21st century, a presidency that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court because they were talking about physical manifestations of votes where there were hanging chads and did someone not correctly mark the person that they wanted. So I think we'll continue to need to look at what are the best ways to ensure that a vote is properly recorded, but that happens whether it's an electronic vote or a paper vote.
Yeah. Can I ask the question? No. Yes, here also electronic voting machine system is been, when the case went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court finally it's decided that the EVM is okay. Now my question is to Ellison. In the last US election, when the Trump lost, he didn't accept the elections. He said that this election has been stolen by the Democrats. He didn't accept it. He sent the goons to the your parliament, whatever you have there, to to have a pressure over there that this election is stolen. Now my question is this, that even if this elections, present election will be over by November, will the Trump, if the Trump loses, will he accept the result, whatever? If he loses, will he accept the result? And because the way he argue in the speeches, he says that the Kamala, he questions the whether Kamala is Indian or the black, to divide the vote between the Indians and the blacks. So I wanted to ask whether what will be the attitude of the President Trump?
Well, I'm not here to excuse or defend or explain President Trump's past or future actions. So I think it remains to be seen whether he will accept them or not. He's been very vague on that when asked. He's very focused, as we were just talking about, the security of elections, who's allowed to vote. And all I know is we've seen data-wise that these elections have very low instances of fraud, and that he should accept the outcome of the election regardless of what it is.
Hi, I had a question as well. So now we've seen how the technocrats in America, how they have jumped onto the bandwagon, and we can see how they are swaying because they exert a lot of social capital, and they are some of the big soft powers in the entire world. Who doesn't follow Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk in every corner of the world? And we see them trying to subvert the elections, or we see them trying to favor one candidate over the other, and these are people with exponential influence. So how do you see that affect the election result on the ground, what it is like? Are the younger folks do they tend to listen to them more? How do you see that play out?
Well, I definitely want Ashika to comment on this, but I would say just reflect back to what she said earlier, which is that if you want to be a president, if you want to be a political candidate at any level, you have to have money to run your campaign. And so when someone dumps $66 million a month into a campaign, that is significant. But I think it matters how that message is, or how that money is used and what message is conveyed.
And in addition with the money, it's also just like resources, other resources, right? So if you have I won't name any names, but if you have a owner of a social media company who is favoring one candidate, then what do you think they're utilizing the social media platform for, right? And so we've seen an insertion of different rules apply to different people. So I definitely think that figures like the ones that you mentioned are impacting our elections, whether we want to really lend credence to it or not. There is an influence, right? As far as how I feel young people, I feel like, I'm a millennial, but I feel like these Gen Zers, they are really smart. And they're like, the old tactics are not really working for them, right? And so just because a Mark Zuckerberg says, yes, this is what's supposed to happen, I don't feel like it's as influential as it used to be maybe for
if
other
Taylor
demographics.
Swift were to do something.
Now that's
or
listen,
Beyonce.
So in political campaigns, we do have surrogates and validators, right? And you utilize those people to get out a message. But I think people are just seeing through the rhetoric. And so, like I said, it does have a big impact when it comes to the monetary aspect of it, and just kind of how messages are kind of being put out there. I've seen recently with Twitter or X now, they had to add, public comment. So whenever something is posted and it's not necessarily true. The app now puts a bottom comment, and it's like fact checking in real life, right? And so I think tools like that, and that's a product of AI. I think products like that can help fact check in real life before something gets widespread is very helpful.
Hello. So I have a question. I'm a student of public policy, so I'll throw a statistic at you first because that's what's been happening.
What you do.
So the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability said that there have been 8 million illegal border crossings ever since President Biden took over office, out of which around 2 million got away. My question is, if there is a broken system, why hasn't there been a concerted effort to fix it? Because 2 million people coming in sounds like a bad idea. It's more people to house, put on welfare, or just accommodate in such a big country. My other question is, are people from states that are not border states, so not California or not Texas, are they also concerned with illegal immigration as much as people in border states? Yeah.
Yeah, so to your first question, it is a major issue, but it's also a big talking point in politics, right? It's a very complicated issue, right, that requires multiple fixes. Earlier this year, as Allison mentioned, there was a brokered compromise deal that was used as political football, right? That could have solved some of the issues. So I definitely think each party looks at the issue differently and looks at different fixes, but there has to be a compromise and I guess like a coming of the minds coming together in order to fix the issue. And that part is necessary. Congress is needed for that. Yeah, I wish I can tell you like a simple, this is what the fix is.
Oh, I don't think there's a simple fix, but there's a simple answer. And that is that our economy depends on migrant labor and immigrants coming in to fill jobs in the United States at every level. And so there is this is my personal opinion, and it is a very basic one, but it doesn't get fixed because it's necessary.
Yeah. That's very nice.
So here I am again. Basically, we have seen that America has largely been a war economy. If you see the history and you can check the facts, whenever there have been wars, defense has been supplied by America. So in this election coming up, do you see a ceasefire happening to get emotional sympathy votes from either of the sides? Secondly, I wanted to find out if there is a woman standing, is she above a lot of these sexcapade stories? Are they fabricated or implications are for real? You usually see the males, like something happened and then there's a scandal that breaks out, So a woman would not likely be implicated, so. We're talking about voting and implications.
No, but there's been also recently suggestions that certain candidates have made it into their position because of sex acts that they performed, and I think those have generally been brushed aside as unsubstantiated. And I think we've seen in recent elections that very egregious acts by other candidates have also gone unaddressed. So. But I don't know that the gender of the candidate makes all that much difference. I think it's the salaciousness of the initial story, and then it tends to go away.
Agreed. We are just now at the point of the election where people are paying attention. It starts Labor Day, and so we also in America have something called an October surprise, which I don't know how more surprising this election can be, right? and that's usually kind of when both candidates are kind of like trying to define the other, right? So there's no telling what you're going to see in the next couple of weeks, but it's definitely here, and it's President Trump has already kind of started, right? And he's trying to define her before she can define herself. So I definitely think you're going to hear a lot more stories, but now it's more about what sticks.
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Omkar Kundaskar. I'm an undergraduate student of political science. I have 3 questions. First to Rob, sir. So, being a career diplomat, how do you feel the change in government affects your work at this consulate level? Second question is to Dashika ma'am. So, we have seen like the de-dollarization campaign is being run by many countries. So we have seen Trump taking hard on those things. But how is the approach being going to be taken by Democrat Party? Because Biden has now pulled off himself from the election campaigns. And the third question is, we have seen many US presidents raising the debt ceilings that the US has. So how that, like, if it collapses, it would be a huge impact on the world. So how the upcoming parties, like Democrats and Republicans, like as an expert, how are you looking at those issues?
So basically, my work gets harder when when my party is not in office. And so, for instance, before working for Google and in between campaigns, I worked for the ACLU. And so all of the policies that we implemented pretty much went out the door the day that Trump was elected, right? And so whereas we used to have kind of work-life balance a little bit, we were working extra hard to make sure that we had a defense mechanism for those policies. The good thing is also when our party is not in office, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for you, the organization advocacy groups and organizations that provide money for support of those policies, they're energized, right? They're excited. They're like, we have to win this again. We got to win it back. But I wish people would just stay energized the whole time so we wouldn't have to be on defense all the time and we can play a little bit more when we're on offense. What was your second question?
Debt ceiling.
De-dollarization.
De-dollarization and debt ceiling.
Oh, I thought that was directed to you.
Yeah. Your viewpoint on de-dollarization.
De-dollarization views on by Democrats, like Trump has been already said that he would be taking hard on those issues.
Yeah. So since Biden is no longer the nominee, I can't speak personally on her policies of what she will do. I feel like her positions will be in line with Biden, but I'm not sure. I wish I knew. She's rolling out her policies like, on a rolling basis. I know we have a debate coming up and that's probably going to come up on the 10th, but I'm not sure. I have no idea. I have no idea.
I would say on the debt ceiling, it's probably the one bipartisan issue that still exists. I mean, you'll see either party, depending on their power and their sort of margin of power in Congress, fight about how quickly they're going to get to yes on that. So I don't ever see the U.S. defaulting on its by not raising the debt ceiling. As an American taxpayer, I recognize that this cannot continue to happen, but it's going to take, I think, as we've been talking about, it's going to take bipartisan support, not in debt necessarily, but in what do we pay for, and things like canceling college debt. On the surface, seems like a really great idea, but that's billions of dollars that are being taken out of the U.S. economy that could go to something else, like interest payments on debt.
And to follow real quick, because I know we have to move on, one of the things you're probably seeing a lot in media is like these threats of the government shutdown to come up with a compromise. It's not sustainable. And so I definitely think there will be a compromise soon because we can't keep going the way we've been going.
No, and if the government shuts down, then Coyle and I don't get our salaries. So we always hate that period every year at the end of the year, and we have to sit at home for a couple of weeks and wait for the budget. And then, No, but really, but I'll answer your question, and I think we have to wrap up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We could be here all night, but they just arrived in the middle of the night, so I want to also give them some time to relax a little bit and see some more of the city. But let me, on the, about the government changing though, because I think that's an interesting question, because it may affect also India, but it's been my experience. So I came in under George Bush into the Foreign Service. So I've served under Bush, Obama, Biden, Trump, yeah, so 4 presidents. And I can say like that, it really hasn't changed in foreign policy. Like when I asked that first question about the issues that Americans care about when they vote, they tend to be domestic issues. So that's where you'll see some changes. Sir, you asked about the policy. There's a little bit of negotiation there. On foreign policy, they tend to leave that more to the bureaucrats and the civil servants and those of us who have kind of been working in the field to kind of keep things going. So they prioritize different things. So you may see certain, when we were doing like President Bush, for instance, on like PEPFAR, the AIDS relief. I mean, he's done more to stop AIDS than any president in Africa, which was really interesting. But then the way, they would prioritize abstinence over condom use, for instance. Then the administration, so the nuance is there and that changes, but generally the policy kind of stays the same. So I think and I would expect the same for India, that there'll be, I don't see a lot of change there. And then I think as a diplomat to try to when you have to work under these, I mean, I also have my own personal political views and preferences, right? And we're all entitled to those views. But when we represent, when we are publicly representing the United States, you'll find, I think, a very professional class of diplomats across the world. And we know, you have to recognize that, half the country is choosing the president, more or less. I mean, maybe a little less in some cases. But mostly it's half the country believes in, they're supporting that person, that candidate. So you also have to represent that half, even if you disagree with them, because there is a rationale and a logic behind them. And so that's kind of how I've justified it over the years. Yeah. Yeah, well, okay, one last.
So you mentioned AI when you opened the conversation, and I was very curious because I think both sides of both parties must be having some kind of policy framework in mind, at least to save jobs now, because Hollywood's been through the biggest crisis with the strike that has happened. I'm worried about India too, because we employ lots of people in cinema, and if AI takes over that, then you're going to have a crisis again in the creative industry. So that was my question, and the other is a request. The U.S. visa system, I'm so sorry, is putting me through hell right now.
Oh, time to go, sorry.
Yeah. So, earlier when it was manual, somehow we waited in line and things moved forward, but this technical system is really not helping.
Yeah, this new, I know we're transitioning to this new system, so hopefully these kinks get worked out soon. But the thing I can say about the visas, we are issuing at like record pace, so we're back down to kind of pre-COVID levels finally. And for like students, we've prioritized. So every student will get an interview. There are some classes, so it's mostly the tourist visas, like tourists who have never traveled to the U.S., that's the one where you're sort of suffering. Oh, you should be able to get, no. But yeah, there's the B1, B2, and we have issues with other, H1Bs, but it's also just the demand. I mean, it's just such a huge demand now for visas. And so we're doing, at the consulate here in Mumbai, we do like between 12 and 15, 1,200 to 1,500 visas every day. I mean, it's a constant churn. We have 30 people, 30 officers just adjudicating visas. Each officer does about 120, 130 visas every day. So it's just demand, and we're max capacity. You'd have to build a bigger consulate, more windows, and then, so it's just, yeah, we're doing our best, but hopefully we'll get there. But also when you think about AI, I mean, there's ways that we should probably be looking into the future about doing this. I think a lot of these adjudication decisions can also be done with AI, but this is me speaking personally and not as the consulate representative, but I think it's something that we have to consider also.
Yeah, and as far as AI and the job market, that is a huge topic that is, one, it's bringing a lot of angst to people, right? So when people want to welcome AI and it's a wonderful thing, it has been taking jobs, right? And so that's one of the things we're gonna have to reconcile. I remember I was literally, before I came here, I had to run to my local grocery store, and I realized, like, for the first time I took inventory and I was just like, the aisles are not open. It's self-checkout for every single aisle, right? So whereas it used to be like a 9-aisle store with like checkouts and people that helped you, everything is self-checkout, right? And so that is one of the things where we told out like the amount of jobs that we're creating in the United States. AI could have a negative effect on that, and that's some of the things that we're again, AI, even though it's been around for a long time, is still in its infancy state of like really understanding what it can do and the benefits, but we also have to realize, that's why I said we have to come to grips with the regulation of it and some of the negative impacts it can have as well.
And I would say too, on the piece, especially about creative work, you mentioned the strikes in Hollywood. When it is managed correctly, we get these amazing things like Al Michaels, who is a venerated American sports journalist, his voice being replicated in AI to call every Olympic sport or to introduce every Olympic sport. He is a recognized voice. Orally, people recognize his voice. And with the right construct, he's benefiting from the AI use of his intellectual property.
Thank you. We wish that this doesn't end, but what an engaging session. Would both of you like to have any last word on this before I go for the before we close?
Well, first of all, thank you again so much for having us. These kind of conversations, these kind of conversations, thank you for the embassy for putting this together, because these kind of conversations are where we get to have shared learning, right? And when we talk about democracy, we talked about allowing different perspectives into the fold, into the conversation. And so creating and fostering opportunities for us to learn from each other and learn from each other's understandings makes us better. And so I'm just grateful I know Allison feels the same way. We're really grateful to be a part of this.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Okay. Thank you so much for choosing Chavan Center's Mumbai Dialogue as a platform to present your diversity debate. It was an honor to have all three of you over here. And what a wonderful and engaging, the dynamics from both the parties, both the representation. Today's takeaway was behave in a civil way. I think that is what I feel. Yes. So a special thank to Koel Sen for coordinating with this. Malpeji, I would like to thank you for appreciating Chavan Center. And this is not just a dynamic CEO, no, thank you. It's a dynamic leadership that we have. Yes. And also that, that transcends into our team. And I would like to name my team here too today, because this is our 17th session. I think, complete 2 years in October. So I would like this, all credit goes to, first I'll start with Dr. Mridul Nire sir, who has been leading this. The captain of the ship, Purva Vaise Patil. I would like to say, Datta Bhai Saraf ji, please stand up. He has been at Chavan Centers coordinating the program since 3 decades. Now we are entering the 4th decade now. Nirmala Tai Sawant ji, yeah. Ma'am, please. So other than these initiatives, also we have many other initiatives which you can check on our website. I won't repeat today here, and she's actively participating in that. We have Summer here, our young, enthusiastic and brilliant candidate. My education head, Yogesh, is here. Yeah, Anil Pazhari ji, our library head and knowledge head at Chavan Center. There we have my dear Sanjana, who is coordinating and emailing and calling all of you. And of course, all our trusted audience who make it a point that you be here, attend the sessions, and also those who are watching us live on FB or YouTube. Thank you for following Chavan Center for this. And just some interesting points that, there's so much to learn. I'm not a political science student. I'm a common man representative, I would say, but something from swing state to dark money and just a mere driver's license being a voting card. So I think that was very interesting. Sorry, yeah. And I think the voting booths within a mile. So we are such a blessing. I mean, sometimes we do have a conversations in our center that are we developed, are we developing? So we have the voting booths just within our reach, and yet sometimes we tend to complain that, we have to wait for 2 hours, and here we are listening that it is 8 hours. Sorry? Water also, absolutely. So we are taken care of. So when the candidate, you know what, I would just like to throw a question when choosing a candidate, because in November, as I said, all respect to our visionary Chavan Sahib, on whose name Chavan Center is running and whose vision we try to take forward. So he contributed greatly to establishing Mumbai as the financial capital of the country and a cosmopolitan city in true sense. And that is what we are also trying to build, a platform through this Mumbai dialogue. So just one thing that I would like to put forward, because in November, other than presidential elections, in India also, we have a lot of interesting things coming, plus the Mumbai elections also still pending. So when choosing a candidate, what matters more to you? Their policy or their vision? The agenda or the goals? The public opinion or integrity? And maybe there are a lot more questions that we need to think on. So without a further ado, I would like to thank everyone. We end this session with a national anthem. Thank you. No, we have to
हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Yes. Oh, yeah.